Brice has been an environmental activist for a very long time, so I'm really looking forward to hearing his story about how he's helping change things in biodiversity. Brice.
Thank you, Adam. Adam said to me, you must first explain why biodiversity is important. Biodiversity is a sort of another name for nature. And nature is strong and healthy with a lot of diversity of species, as much variety as possible. And if you reduce the variety and the number of species, plants, animals, worms, your nature is going to become fragile. It's particularly important for human beings to have a strong and healthy nature, because nature gives a lot of products and services which everybody think are granted, but they're not granted. You have to keep nature healthy. This means you have to keep as much biodiversity as possible to have a healthy nature. Look at those services that biodiversity gives to the human beings. Think of the water, forest. If you don't have any forest, you don't have water. Think of the earthworms, the worms which are so good for the soil fertility, which we are destroying with pesticides and plowing too much. Think of the bees. Now everybody knows about the bees. If you don't have bees and other pollinators, you're going to lose up to 30% of all your harvests and your crops. So you need to keep bees, which means, for instance, that the farmers have to grow flowers. Flowers, yes, flowers for the bees to be healthy and to be able to help you pollinate. But it's not only the services, it's also the importance of having a wild wild strains of our crops, wheat, rice, corn, all the others. All the rice of India was lost because there was a little bug which was giving a virus to all the rice. And it's finally, after having screened 7,000 strains of rice, one little strain of rice, a small rice which was in Uttar Pradesh, which saved the whole crop, the whole rice in the world. Same thing for the vine in France. Remember la phylloxera? Well, that was a wild species on Oklahoma and Texas which saved all the wines in the world. So it's so important to keep the wild strains of all our crops. When we grow wheat, we need to have a strong cluster of grain to eat it. But nature doesn't work like that. Nature is all the contrary. Nature wants to spread its grains because it wants to reproduce. So you have to keep both strains. It's so important to keep places where you can have all this. Why is biodiversity declining? Today, biodiversity is declining 1,000 times faster than nature would ever allow it to disappear, because it's natural that some species disappear. But 1,000 times faster, here we're having a huge problem. So we have to slow down this, and we have to keep all the habitats. The main reason of disappearance of species is the destruction and degradation of habitats where they are living. And climate change is adding to the problem because it's going much faster. All the animals and all the plants in the world are migrating right now to avoid the heat of climate change. It's slowly, by a few centimeters a day, slowly all plants and all animals are going to the poles. People don't know that, so migration is on the way, and animals are getting smaller and smaller because there's less to eat because of climate change. So it's a huge task for all of us to protect nature, to have as much species as we can, to save the wild plants because we need them for the future as an insurance. Look at the forest, look at the problems. We have mismanaged antibiotics. We need antibiotics, and now we're having more and more resistant bugs and germs to antibiotics. Where are we going to find the antibiotics of the future? In the forest. In the forest, for instance, in Amazonia, there you have special ants, little ants. They have bacteria on the back of them, and they feed the bacteria by eating leaves. And when you have bad, aggressive bacteria which want to eat the bacteria which are on the back of the ants, they create an antibiotics. Could it be this antibiotic for tomorrow? We don't know. This is why we have to keep absolutely lots of places where we need to have all the insurance. all the resources of nature for tomorrow. Adam, do I go directly to my idea? I have an idea for forest. As you know, deforestation is the second contributor to climate change. The first is coal. The second, deforestation, because each time you destroy forests, you burn the forest, all the carbon which was stored in the trees goes into the atmosphere. So we have to stop deforestation as much as we can. It's very difficult for tropical countries, which are most of them developing countries. They don't have the means always to save the forest, to protect the forest. Very difficult for them to do so. They don't have enough money to make it simple. In the climate talks, there has been something which has been created, incentives for people to save the forest. It is called RED, Reduced Emissions from Deforestation and Degradation. So you can buy, if you have enough money, you can buy RED certificates or things like that, by which these efforts, these initiatives to save the forest will receive some money. I have another idea, and I think we have to have planetary ideas. What is the idea? That aviation should save the forest. How can that happen? Aviation is 3% of greenhouse gas emissions. International flights are not covered by the negotiations. Why? Because it goes from one country to another, which is too complicated for international diplomats. The Climate Convention only focuses on national territories. What goes from one territory to another is not covered. But aviation, by itself, all the aviation companies agreed they had to do something. They have decided that as from 2027, all airline companies will compensate for the emissions they are responsible. You know that for the time being, aeroplanes, they need kerosene, so that's a fossil fuel. For the time being, you have no electric planes. It's going to come, but you don't have it yet. So they have to compensate. How are they going to compensate? They don't know yet. They are thinking about it. Each airline would, they're going to have some cooking oil, for instance, to put in the airplane instead of having kerosene. They're going to think of lots of things. It's going to be complicated for each company to find the way they're going to compensate. My idea is, let's create an international treaty between the tropical forest and aviation. Let's organize the fact that all airline companies, all flights will compensate to help the tropical forest in South America, Africa, and Indonesia. This is possible. I have spoken myself to the airline companies. They agree. The problem today is how are we going to help Africa, South America, and Indonesia to create a body which will be ready to negotiate with aviation companies. That's the task we have in front of us. My dream is that each time you take a plane, you're going to help to save the forest. Thank you.